Today I'm going to read the first part of one of my favorite books by Patricia Polacco. It's called Thank You, Mr. Falker. And you're going to meet a little girl who kind of reminds me of myself. And so as I read today, I would like you to think about how she reminds you of you. I think you'll find you probably have some similarities. That's what we'll be talking about. The grandpa held the jar of honey so that all the family could see, then dipped a ladle into it and drizzled honey on the cover of a small book. The little girl had just turned 5. "Stand up, little one," he cooed. "I did this for your mother, your uncles, your older brother, and now you." Then he handed the book to her. "Taste." She dipped her finger into the honey and put it in her mouth. "What is that taste?" the grandpa asked. The little girl answered, "Sweet." Then all of the family said in a single voice, "Yes, and so is knowledge. But knowledge is like the bee that made the honey sweet. You have to chase it through the pages of a book." The little girl knew that the promise was read. The promise to read was hers at last. Soon she was going to learn to read. Tricia, the littlest girl in the family, grew up loving books. Her school teacher mother read to her every night. Her red-headed brother brought his books home from school and shared them. And whenever she visited the family farm, her grandfather or grandmother read to her by the stone fireplace. When she turned 5 and went to kindergarten, most of all, she hoped to read. Each day she saw the kids in first grade across the hall reading, and before the year was over, some of the kids in her own class began to read. Not Tricia. Still, she loved being at school because she could draw. The other kids would crowd around her and watch her do her magic with the crayons. "In first grade, you'll learn to read," her brother said. In first grade, Tricia sat in a circle with the other kids. They were all holding Our Neighborhood, their first reader, sounding out letters and words. They said b, b, oh boy, and l, 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 look. The teacher smiled at them when they put all the sounds together and got a word right. But when Tricia looked at the page, all she saw were wiggling shapes. And when she tried to sound out words, the other kids laughed at her. "Tricia, what are you looking at in that book?" they'd say. "I'm reading," she'd say back to them. But her teacher would move on to the next person. Always when it was her turn to read, the teacher had to help her with every single word. And while the other kids moved up into the second reader or the third reader, she stayed alone in Our Neighborhood. Tricia began to feel different. She began to feel dumb. The harder words got for the little girl, the more and more time she spent drawing. How she loved to draw, or just sitting and dreaming, or when she could, going for walks with her grandmother. One summer day, she and her grandma were walking together in the small woods behind their farm. It was twilight. The air was sweet and warm. Fireflies were just coming up from the grasses. As they walked, Tricia said, "Grandma, do you think I'm different?" "Of course," Grandma answered. "To be different is the miracle of life. You see all those little fireflies? Every one is different." "Do you think I'm smart?" Tricia didn't feel smart. Her grandma hugged her. "You are the smartest, quickest, dearest little thing ever." Right then, the little girl felt safe in her grandmother's arms. Reading didn't matter so much. Tricia's grandma used to say that the stars were holes in the sky. They were the light of heaven coming from the other side. And she used to say that someday she would be on the other side where the light comes from. One evening they lay on the grass together and counted the lights from heaven. "You know," her grandma said, "all of us will be there someday. Hang on to the grass or you'll lift right off the ground and there you'll be." They laughed and both hung on to the grass. But it was not long after that night that her grandma must have let go of the grass, because she went to where the lights were on the other side, and not long after that, Tricia's grandpa let go of the grass too. School seemed harder and harder now. Reading was just plain torture. When Sue Ellen read the page, or Tommy Bob read his page, they read so easily that Tricia would watch the top of their heads to see if something was happening to their heads that wasn't happening to hers. And numbers were the hardest thing of all to read. She never added anything right. "Line up the numbers before you add them," the teacher would say. But when Tricia tried, the numbers looked like a stack of blocks, wobbly and ready to fall. She just knew she was dumb. Then one day her mother announced that she had gotten a teaching job in California, a long way from the family farm in Michigan. Even though the grandma and her grandpa were gone, the little girl didn't want to move. Maybe though the teachers and the kids in her new school wouldn't know how dumb she was. She and her mother and brother moved across the country in a two-tone 1949 Plymouth. It took 5 days. But at the new school it was the same. When she tried to read, she stumbled over words. The cat, ran. She was reading like a baby in 3rd grade. And when her teacher read along with them and called on Tricia for an answer, she gave the wrong answer every time. "Hey, dummy," a boy called out to her on the playground. "How come you're so dumb?" The other kids stood near him and they laughed. Tricia could feel the tears burning in her eyes. How she longed to be back at her grandparents' farm in Michigan. That's where we're going to stop for today. We'll read the next part tomorrow.